Yeah, good morning. Those who don't know me, I'm Andy Mahoney from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. While we're just bringing up my presentation here, I guess I wanted to acknowledge that a lot of what I'm about to present wouldn't have been possible without the physical facility of NARL and all the people who've supported that with Barrow Arctic Science Consortium and UAC Science over the years. I would even go so far as to say without some sage advice from people like Kenny Cook and Kunik, Mike Donovan, who many of you know, I might not even be here. I've done some pretty foolish things on the sea ice, and some advice that they've given me has allowed me to still be here to tell you about what we've been finding out about coastal sea ice over the last 25 years or so. All right, this one's Jeremy and I are both going to be talking about coastal processes. I'm going to cover the solid, that, and Jeremy the wet part of the coastal ocean. This is a nice photo, I think, showing what it looks like in the wintertime. For those of you who haven't been here in the winter, the ice comes right up to the shoreline, and sometimes it's even difficult to tell ends and the ocean starts. Oh, I got it. Okay. A pretty simple outline. I'm going to talk about past, present, and future research on three particular areas. This is not exhaustive by any means, but I'm going to be talking about landfast sea ice extent, sea ice mass balance, and I'll explain that term later, and coastal sea ice dynamics. And I'm just going to finish up with an outlook of what the next questions are. To familiarize folks with sea ice in the coastal zone, again, we're here in the summertime. There's very little ice here, always makes me a little bit sad. But two types of sea ice, we can split the ice in the coastal zone into two types. It's landfast sea ice, the ice that's attached to the coast, doesn't move. This can be used as a platform for hunting and traveling, protects the coast from erosion if there are waves present. And there's the pack ice. This is the mobile sea ice, drifts under the influence of winds and currents and tides. It opens and creates a floor lead, and that's the open water that is so vital for many of the subsistence hunting activities that take place from the sea ice. And it interacts with the landfast ice when that lead closes, and that can create hazardous situations on the ice when the ice deforms or even gets pushed up on. And start off talking about the extent of landfast sea ice that we've been able to map based on satellite imagery. There was some pioneering work done by Roger Barry and others. Well, I don't know that they ever actually visited here to NARL, but they did a lot of the early work, some of the earliest satellite data that came out in the 1970s. And they mapped landfast sea ice, and that's shown in the red and yellow lines here in the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas. And then later on, based on some different satellite data in 1996, 2008, I kind of repeated their study. And what we found was that in the Beaufort Sea, not a whole lot of change. Landfast ice was found pretty much in the same places that it was back in the 1970s. But on the Chukchi side, significant loss of landfast ice, indicating that the Chukchi side is experiencing different changes to the Beaufort Sea in terms of landfast ice extent. We've also looked at the timing of landfast ice formation. And what we see here consistently, unlike with the extent, is that in the Chukchi Sea, we're seeing later formation and an earlier breakup leading to an overall reduction in the time that landfast ice is present at the coast. Something like 6 to 8 weeks shorter between 1996 and 2008 than it was in the 1970s. And we also see that. We also see in the Beaufort Sea. So even though the landfast ice extent doesn't seem to be changing in the Beaufort Sea, it's still occupying the coastline for a shorter period of time. And again, here we're looking at about a 6-week overall shortening of the landfast ice period due to a late formation and an earlier breakup. You may have noticed that those dates ended in 2008. And we're now in the process of trying to update that, bringing that climatology up to 2022 and allowing us to continuously update that going into the future, working with ice chart data from the National Weather Service, Alaska Sea Ice Programs. They're already doing the work of mapping where the landfast ice has been based on data,
I just
and now
asked
we're
in the
applying
chat, and
our techniques to
I'm trying to.
Could folks please turn off, if folks have their speakers on, you need to mute yourself online.
oh, no problem. Working with data from the National Weather Service Alaska Sea Ice Program, that's going to allow us to fill in the data since 2008, bring it up to present, and allow us to keep updating this. I think as many of you know, there's been some really big changes happened in sea ice since 2008, and we don't yet know how that has actually played out in the landfast ice in a quantitative way. We're also hoping that these data are going to allow us to improve our ability to model landfast sea ice and possibly allow us to predict it in medium and long term in the future. In addition to shrinking in both extent, spatial extent and time, sea ice has also been shrinking in the fourth dimension in its thickness. We've been making measurements of mass balance of landfast ice here in Upper since 1999. We're measuring the ice thickness, the snow depth, and the temperature profile. And that allows us to calculate the mass balance of the sea ice. It allows us to calculate how heat loss from the ocean to the cold atmosphere results in an increase in the mass of the sea ice during wintertime, and how absorption of solar radiation and heat from the warmer atmosphere in the springtime leads to thinning and reduction of sea ice mass in the springtime. There's 14 years of data presented here from 1999 to 2016. We were missing some years in the middle there. But each of these curves you can see shows a gradual increase in ice thickness over the course of winter, and then an abrupt as we get into springtime and the ice starts melting. And in each of those years, we can find the time when maximum ice thickness occurred and what that maximum ice thickness was in each year. And we look at that over the time span of the data that we have. And first of all, we see the maximum sea ice thickness here in Upper there's been a lot of interannual variability, but about a 2 centimeter per year thinning over the course of that time. Now, the data points on the far left side of this graph are very close to me. They represent my first visit here to Upper when I was first measuring ice. So over the span of my 20-ish year career, we've seen about 40 centimeter reduction in ice if we continue that trend linear. That's pretty significant to think about. We've also seen an abrupt change in when that maximum ice thickness occurs. You can see on the, it doesn't show up as clearly on the screen as on my on the laptop screen here. I'll see what I can do with the mouse. No, not going to get the mouse to come over to that screen. I can't get the mouse to be the screen on the laptop. Okay, is there a pointer here?
I'm not sure. Somebody said earlier they couldn't get the mouse to work.
I will do an interpretive dance. There's on my screen here, there's a gray region that indicates what the normal range is. And essentially it's the latter half of May. And those of you who watched the video last night, extolling the importance of average intelligence, if you listened carefully, they said that ice thickness typically reaches 5 to 6 feet thick. Maximum ice thickness occurs in late May. And if you look at the left-hand side of both of these graphs, you've got ice that's about 5 feet thick. Maximum thickness occurs in the latter part of May. So from the time of that movie, which I think came out in 1948, if I remember, that normal still somewhat held, even going into the 1990s and early 2000s. And then sometime around 2014, we see a really abrupt change. What we think causes that change is that ice is now starting to melt from below much earlier than it used to. Warm water is making its way underneath the landfast ice at a much earlier time of year than it used to. I think there's still a lot of work to work out exactly what the path to segue into what the new research is in terms of mass balance. of land-fast ice. We're now putting out more sophisticated equipment that are easier to deploy. In fact, we've been outsourcing the deployment a lot to UIC science personnel these days, which I think is a really good move forward. It builds experience and capability within the community. It cuts down on travel needs for researchers. We don't need to fly people up here, house them, accommodate them. Here at UIC are more than capable of putting out these instruments and collecting these data for us. This is an example of data from a seasonal ice mass balance buoy that was deployed in Elson Lagoon. And you can see here how we're capturing that same growth and early onset of melt, with all of this extra information about how cold penetrates and how thawing starts initially at the beginning and then penetrates through the snow and ice and starts ablating the surface of the ice in springtime. And to get on to the third topic that I mentioned, coastal sea ice dynamics, a subject very close to my own heart. I'm now going to talk about the coastal sea ice radar. Those of you who've been around downtown may have noticed that on the bank building, there is a radar, and maybe you wondered why that radar is there. We've been using that to monitor the ice motion near the coast. Turns out for a long time. The first sea ice radar was deployed. Richard Glenn mentioned Lou Shapiro yesterday. Lou Shapiro was part of a project that deployed a radar in the 1970s. And they recorded data with a 35mm camera on a time lapse. They had a little pocket watch that was put in the frame of the shot so you could see what time. We've moved on a little bit since there. We're now on virtual sea ice radar, which everything is digital now, and we get the time. The radar, I'm going to show some images from it recent coming up, but just to sort of prime you for that, what we see is roughness. The radar isn't very good at detecting smooth ice. Looks dark, just like open water looks dark. So in the imagery that we're about to see, dark doesn't always mean water. It could mean smooth ice as well, but bright is almost always ice, unless there's waves on the surface of the ocean, but I'm not going to show any data of waves. So in what's coming, white is ice and dark might be ice or might be open water. This is a move I made. Okay, my movies are apparently not going to play. The movie was playing, you'd see pack ice drifting past and that boundary that I talked about between the pack ice and the land fast ice. Cool, it is moving, yeah. So you can see flows opening and breaking. The land fast ice edge itself actually changing over pretty short time scales, really suggesting that it's not a place that you want to loiter when this sort of activity is taking place. There isn't a whole lot of ice out there. There have been a few flows drifting in and out. If you do want to look at real-time data, we host it on our website at cs.alaska.edu. The motivation for this radar, in many ways, actually came from Craig George sitting in the back, expressing some of his concerns about wanting to watch the ice and possibly get an early warning if it was ever going to break out and detach. And I think after 20 plus years, we're now on the cusp of being able to detect land-fast ice breakouts very soon as they're happening. I'm trying to wait to see if the screen is going to change or if I need to press the button again.
Andy, can you note for the crowd that's not maybe as experienced with
Okay,
whaling,
now I think.
why that's important?
I'm sorry?
Can you note for the crowd that might not be as experienced with whaling why that's important?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So if you were standing at the edge when it broke out, perhaps, for example, you were hunting for whales or you were a scientist trying to work out how thick the ice was, it is not good to be on the ice when it breaks out. Historically, there have been breakouts that have taken people out to sea. Recently, I don't think anyone or any equipment has been lost, but it's certainly at the forefront of my mind when I'm out on the ice is making sure that that ice is still going to be there attached to the coast when I want to go back home. So I think this video should time again as an example of a breakout event that took place. The landfall ice is there, not really looking like it's doing very much, and then all of a sudden it detaches and breaks out. The red shading is the result of some, we're calling it flicker analysis. By looking at consecutive images and looking for very small changes in the radar image between consecutive images, we can detect to breakout. I go to the next slide. We see 4 frames from that video. At 0400 on January 23rd, 2022, we see just the first evidence of this flickering, the red pixel showing up in the image. 8 minutes later, that whole area that's going to break out turns red. And it's not until 0436 that we actually see any identifiable crack between the landfast ice and the ice that is now in the process of detaching. So we, in this, potentially got about a 36-minute lead time on ice that was about to break out. I will admit I cherry-picked a good example here, one that was very clean and easy to interpret. It's not always easy to interpret. We sometimes see flickering that doesn't lead to a breakout. We sometimes see clouds going over that makes flickering, and we need to work out a way to separate out those things, but I think we're getting close. And to wrap it up, we've got some new research on this. So what we need to do now is understand what is causing that flickering. And that will allow us to much better use that information to predict breakout events, and I think understand what is causing those other changes that I talked about. Why is the landfast ice less extensive than it used to be? If we can understand what makes ice attach to the coast and detach from the coast, then I think we're going to much better understand what's causing that loss of landfast ice extent in the long term. We've got some new equipment that we're bringing to bear, a radar, an inframetric radar, and wave detectors that are going to help us answer that problem. So I think where we're at now, we understand very well that landfast ice is shrinking in all dimensions: thickness, extent, and duration. We're close to understanding the stabilization and destabilization of landfast ice. But I think our biggest knowledge gap right now is freeze-up. It's a time of year that's very difficult, potentially very dangerous to get out on the ice. I think this is an opportunity. We're working closely with indigenous experts to know how to navigate that season of the year safely and effectively. And it can be a very short-lived time of year. So it actually potentially means coming up here prepared to stay for a long time to catch that short-lived freeze-up event, to make sure we're in the right place at the right time. So I will leave it there, hopefully leaving time for questions.
Thank you, Andy. We're going to have to hold questions for now because I'm getting the signal, but hopefully there'll be time at the end.